Hello and welcome to the big picture. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi has completed his 5-nation visit, of which his visit to the United States was most significant. The US visit has witnessed the rare scene of the Indian Prime Minister addressing the joint sitting of the US Congress, meetings with President Obama, think tanks and others. What has emerged out of this 3-day visit to US, which is largely seen as a very successful one? Where does India-US relationship stand now? How will this deepening relationship affect or help India as well as in its ties with other countries, especially countries like China and Russia? What has been the outcome of this visit? We will discuss all this today with Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to US, Commodore retired C. Uday Bhakar, Director, Society for Policy Studies, Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow at Observer Research Foundation and also a veteran journalist, Professor K.P. Vijayalaxmi of the Center for US, Canadian and Latin American Studies at the JNU, and on phone line from Washington, D.C. is Chidanand Rajghatta, foreign editor and US correspondent for the Times of India. Welcome to all of you. Chidu, are you there? Okay. We'll go to him later. Meera?
Yeah.
Just the other day we were discussing before the visit started. So at the end of the visit, do you know some of the things which you were talking about, some of it has come through. Yeah. So you see the successful visit?
Well, I see it as consolidating the framework for ties which had been set out by the two leaders in their previous two exchanges. There are also some specific outcomes in the sense that the way has been cleared for India's membership of the Missile Technology Control Regime. There are still some formalities to be completed, but at the next meeting it is probably expected that the membership would come through, because the period within which countries could convey objections is over and no country has conveyed an objection. On the NSG, the US extended its support and said that India is ready for NSG membership. But it is going to be quite difficult because China has reiterated its stance that this should be decided on the basis of consensus and it should be further discussed. And of course, they continue to insist that membership of the Non-Proliferation Treaty should be a condition for new members to join the NSG, which is not our understanding of the NSG. But this is something which will be carried further. We have to see how it goes. It may be more difficult. In terms of climate change, I think the US affirmed its commitment to join the Paris Agreement as soon as possible this year. And India said that it had also started the processes for meeting the shared objective. On this, there has been some subsequent clarification by the Indian government that it's not that they are intending to do this year, because there is some doubt whether if Donald Trump is elected or if there is a Republican-controlled Senate, whether the US would be in a position to ratify this. Or other countries will be in a position to ratify it, like China. So India will wait and see how the process of ratification goes on.
Okay.
And then I would say in the field of defense, there has been a fairly significant statement that the two countries have reached. First of all, I think they finalized the text of LIMOA, the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement. And if you look at the text of the statement, it is in the context of joint exercises.
Sharing bases and...
Not sharing bases, the context of joint exercises, humanitarian disaster and disaster relief. And, any other situation, I think, would really have to be discussed and decided.
Let me get Uday Bhaskar in on this. Uday? This is being said that the joint statement even talks of US recognizing India as a major defense partner. What does it mean?
Well, I think I'll just pick up on the point Meera made about consolidation. If you look at Prime Minister Modi's visit, I would go to the extent of suggesting that this is a consolidation of the new phase in India-US relationship, which begins in July 2005. So to that extent, there is continuity with Dr. Manmohan Singh and then President Bush. And there are various elements. For instance, even on the civilian nuclear cooperation, it appears now that they have consolidated some of the loose ends, and there is now talk about some kind of tangible nuclear commerce, and a couple of entities have been identified in the private sector. Specific to defense, again, I think there has been a fair amount of staff work that has preceded this visit, so that the United States now is in a position to be able to engage with India, perhaps in technology, perhaps in the supply of certain specific platforms. And I think this is the kind of detail that will be worked out with the defense ministers, meaning Mr. Parikar on our side and whatever Secretary Carter has done.
The joint statement is talking of, US giving us the dual-use technologies which were denied
Which
to
were
us for a
denied
long time.
earlier. So I think that is what this visit has done, which is to, I think, convey the commitment on both sides. And I often say that July 2005 was preceded by June 2005, when we had a very comprehensive defense agreement signed by the Honorable President when he was Defense Minister, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee at that time, and his counterpart was Mr. Donald Rumsfeld. In many ways, what was outlined in June 2005 is now a little more, I would say, realizable, because much of the technical detail, including issues like certain agreements, protocols, have now been brought onto the anvil. But I do want to caution one thing, Girish. While the United States has identified India as, quote unquote, a major defense partner, there's also been a certain amount of, I would say, pruning. If you look at the Obama statement of January 2016, when he was here for the Republic 15 for the Republic Day parade, now on South China Sea, the reference is not so explicit. So if you look at the whole gamut of defense, security and strategic, lot of focus on technology.
South China, the mention of South China Sea is not there.
Is not there as explicitly as it was earlier.
No, it's not there at all.
It's not there at all.
So
But there is a mention in a...
No,
in
freedom
they
of
talk
seas
of
is there.
freedom of
Yeah,
navigation
exactly.
and freedom of overflights,
Right.
but there's no specific geographical area mentioned.
So I think this is what I mean by saying that this is a consolidation, taking stock, I think, on both sides. For Prime Minister Modi, what is politically feasible in India. And constantly, I think for me, the point of reference is that in as much as we have a closer relationship with the United States, which is still a work in progress, we have to keep in mind Moscow. And how will the India-Russia relationship be affected, as also China?
No, we will come to that later. Let me get Chidanand in on this. Chidanand, from the optics which we saw during these last 2 days of the PM's visit in US, as far as the Indian media was concerned, the optics were very good. It was all over. How was it? How has it been taken there? How important has this visit been as far as the US is concerned?
Well, considering that it came right in the middle of the US, the climax of the US primaries, presidential election primaries, it did attract quite a bit of attention, more than usual, I'd say. I've seen a lot of commentaries in India where the outcome is attached to sort of personal pathologies about the individual. People who don't like Mr. Modi tend to sort of take it apart, and people who love him think this was the greatest thing. But realistically, as far as if you just look at what it did for U.S.-India relations, I would say that this visit really aligned India more closely with the U.S. than ever before. I was struck by Mr. Modi's use of the expression historical hesitancies here. He seemed to suggest that we went a little back and forth over the past several years. And he returned India to, the expression that Mr. Vajpayee first used, natural allies, which had been actually, I think, discarded since then to natural partners. He said, we are natural allies. And I think there was a very, very clear sharing of goals and objectives and alignment. And I think the U.S. also, pulled out all stops. I found it very interesting that much of his emphasis centered on going to the Hill and appealing to the Congress, talking to them. This was the same Congress which actually had, whose laws had stopped him from coming to the U.S. And I thought that was very smart and very thoughtful, because no matter which administration comes to the White House next in November, the U.S. Congress, 90% of U.S. Congress is usually is re-elected. 90%. It's a very high rate of re-election. So he's assured that pretty much the same Congress, same Senate, and same House will be in Washington. And so it was a smart decision to sort of focus energies on the Congress. And overall, there was a sense that he really pulled India back. And the triggers I see, the difference between the last visit and also President Obama's 2 visits to India was the Chinese action. I think much of what Mr. Modi did was triggered by Chinese intransigency on 2 issues. One is terrorism, where they have not been very sympathetic to India's
Problems.
sort of suffering. And 2, membership of institutions like NSG and MTCR, and going even further up to the UN Security Council. I think there's a realization in India that the Chinese are not. If you remember, for a while, the left-wing romantic vision was of Chindia, that China and India would be partners, and they would actually take apart or at least contest the United States brick by brick, as someone said. I think that
phase is over,
and that sort of hope has melted. And the sense I got was Mr. Modi has overcome whatever personal peak he may have had, and decided to align India more with the U.S. because they have many more shared objectives and shared goals.
Okay. Manoj, would you agree with Chidu there that India has moved much closer to U.S. at any point in the past, compared to at any point in the past?
I wouldn't say that. You remember that infamous episode when Pandit Nehru wanted a military alliance with the United States. So there have been an episode in the 1962 war where we were very, very close to the U.S. Military was advising us. U.S. planes were flying around in India. But I would agree with Bhakar and with Meera Shankar when they say that it's really a consolidation of what's been happening for a while now. But if you like all joint statements and speeches are like scripture. You can pass and you can pick your phrases, etc. The ones that I'd like to pick are ones, for example, the deletion of the reference to South China Sea.
Yes.
Now that was very, very significant. And number 2, when Mr. Modi, toward the end of his speech, spoke of the autonomy of decision making and the diversity of perspectives. I thought that he had once again hoisted the flag of strategic autonomy. I don't think that's gone away. I think, yes, we are creating a new relationship with the United States. It's still a work in progress, as Bhaskar has pointed out. But the point is, we want to do it the way we want to do it, in the sense that we are certainly not becoming an adjunct of Washington. And I think that is made very clear on the climate change business. If you look at the joint statement, the United States wants it within the year because Obama thinks it's a legacy issue, and he thought that he would get Indian backing, but the Indians are very clear because our interests are not in jumping into the climate change treaty straight away. So I definitely think that if you take away the hype, see, in every visit like this, there is hype and there is a certain amount of spin. You take it away, you get a kind of a very good working visit with considerable advance in certain areas, but I wouldn't say there are breakthroughs of any kind.
Okay. There are no breakthroughs of any kind. Vijayalaxmi, this alignment business, that being the closest ally, even using the word major defense partner, you think, how do you look at this? Do you think that India has moved much closer to US, like say in the last several decades, forget the Nehru episode?
I think we have actually moved closer and closer, but this has been, as was said by all the panelists, the alignment was started as a strategic convergence. We began by exploring convergences before aligning in many ways, I think, the Asian balance, if you like. So I think from strategic convergence, which we thought of in June 2005, when we negotiated or announced a framework for defense agreement, and then in 2015 we agreed on a fresh new framework. But in between, we've also declared a Delhi Declaration of Friendship.
Right.
So, there are many points of political and technical and procedural signaling that one must see, signals that one must see to see how far this alignment, the word alignment is appropriate here. I think what you're seeing is wanting a closer and very much more comfortable relationship with each other has driven this so-called alignment, I would say. But yes, there has been alignment of objectives, because after exploring convergences, you have come up, with all the objectives that you want. And one was the way that India played the problem it has with China. The problem of China in India, for India, has not just been, South China Sea. We understand that even the Chinese use the same sea lanes for their commerce, so they're not clearly going to upset anything. And nor are we very keen, I think, to see the American dominance and push down our dominance. What we want, though, is in case there is some kind of continued, intransigence by the Chinese, what is our card? What do we play? And therefore, we began on specifically saying that South China Sea, Indian Ocean region, and we have been doing other things with the Indian Ocean region also. So, alignment is one thing. But I think if you see the overall pattern of Indian foreign policy, I would say we have moved from this non-alignment to omnidirectional. We are doing many things at many directions.
Okay.
And I think one fundamental factor that you would see in this visit is, of course, it was a kind of consolidation, but it was also celebrating a couple of years of many visits and all that, So it was trying, as he said, he wanted to have candor and comfort in the conversations of convergence.
Yes,
so
sir.
I think there is something there.
Bhaskar, you wanted to?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I have a slightly different sort of interpretation or choice of word. I don't think India and the United States have a convergence on their security and strategic interests, and I have long grappled with this. We have a certain correspondence. And the reason I'm saying this is because the way the United States has positioned itself at the global level and the DNA of India would suggest that on certain areas there is a broad correspondence. But I would say that for India to really find a convergence, except to say that terrorism is something that we should address jointly. But when you come down to the specifics, you'll find that we really have different, shall we say, interpretations.
But
Case
Uday,
in study is Pakistan, where we again say that on
understand.
policy issues, we would be approaching it
But the
from
word
different
was used,
perspectives.
I think, by Defense Minister
No,
Pranab
I'm
Mukherjee.
just saying that I've also seen that word and I'm
so that is why I
expressing
said
my
we are
disquiet.
exploring.
I'm
I think
saying-
we were exploring this word.
No, since
I
we are
think.
on this public forum, I'm saying for India, we have to ponder over this. The United States has a completely different kind of approach to security. We have had some very awkward experiences. I think Manoj spoke about 1962. You will recall that when Mr. Vajpayee wrote that letter post the nuclear test of May 1998, the United States, in its own interest, went public and sent some signals to China, which have all not been in India's favor. So I'm just reminding ourselves, saying that on some areas we have a correspondence. You will have a convergence if you become a military ally.
Are
That
we,
is what
are we
India, I
anywhere
think, is
heading
not
towards
going
that?
to.
No, I don't think we are heading
Is
towards...
India interested at all in that, or
I
India
don't-
should
I
India
think-
be
I
seen
think-
as that?
I don't think
No,
we are.
another question, Meera, is that in the eyes of the Americans, India is seen as some kind of a balancing power as far as China is concerned, and that seems to be a very consistent policy of the US. But where does India stand?
I wouldn't say that, India is seen as a counterbalance to China. I think both India and the US are interested in fashioning a sustainable and equitable Asian balance, which is not under the hegemony of any one country. Certainly with China's rise, if the US is not active in Asia, you run the risk of having a China-dominated Asia,
So
which is not in our interest.
Are you trying to say that so in India's interest it is it is better for US to be more active in the Asia Pacific and in the Indian Ocean?
Yes.
Is that how India looks at it?
I would say that this is where the convergence is. In East Asia, both countries have an interest in fashioning a sustainable Asian balance or equilibrium. To the west of us, there are divergences because, you know, the US has a certain view of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and so on. Maybe some of their interventions in the Middle East have not been entirely to India's liking. So it's not that on everything we will disagree, we will agree. But I think this is a very major goal that we share.
Okay.
And it is not that we want both, if I may put it, it's more complex than just kind of hedging China in, because both countries, especially the US, has a very robust relationship with China.
And India also wants to have a robust relationship with China.
The point is, when I said the strategic convergence, it's an exploration in 2005. So that was a limited level at which we started approaching. But I think when you see the kind of writings that are coming out of Washington, you're seeing that there is now reference, even in periodicals and news magazines, about a failed policy of parity between India and Pakistan that US realizes. You know, and that's a very significant kind of policy, because now America is not in the same place with regard to Pakistan as it was, let's say, 5-10 years ago. I think that is something Indians need to keep in mind. And I think on China, I think Chinese are also very clear about what India means to them, say from 10 years ago. Things have changed. The Chinese don't see us the same way.
Chidu, you know, as far as the US is concerned, does US see India in these last 2 years of, you know, Modi's prime ministership being you know, different from the way the UPA approached the relationship? Because there are certain agreements, for instance, this Limova agreement, and a certain other agreements. UPA was not very keen on signing these agreements, which this government seemed to be quite keen.
No, I don't think there's there's a great deal of difference. I mean, what's happened is essentially it's been a sort of progression. This is a relationship which has progressed incrementally. You know, it's not as if Mr. Modi has made a giant leap. This has been happening. Indian foreign policy is by and large bipartisan. There is a certain degree of continuity. It's just a progression. I want to address one thing that Manoj and Uday raised. I completely agree that, you know, strategic autonomy is written into the Indian DNA. So anybody who thinks that, you know, India has overnight become an ally of the US is totally wrong. And I've written this several times before that there is no way India is going to become a treaty ally, as we call it, of the US. That is not something India can ever do. And that's also not something I think the US is looking at. And there was one very striking example that the Indian diplomat who briefed us, gave to show how, despite all the alignments, there are instances where India and US will disagree, and I think both sides accept that. So this example was, he said, the US might agree with India's the various issues that India has with China or Pakistan. And it's entirely possible that there are instances, and there have been instances, where India does not agree with U.S. objectives. Most notably, he actually mentioned the Iraq war. So that is one reason cited for India not ever even thinking of being a U.S. Treaty ally, because as a treaty ally, you are obliged to send troops, the way the Japanese, South Koreans, Poland, and various other countries had to do in the case of Iraq, even though many of them did not agree with the U.S. objectives there. So I totally agree there is strategic autonomy, and that's something India will continue to maintain. But short of being a treaty ally, I think there is a great deal of alignment, and much more than there ever was. And this is a progression from previous regimes. It's not something radically different. It started happening under Vajpayee, and Dr. Manmohan Singh advanced it, and I think Mr. Modi has carried it even further.
Uday, as far as other countries are concerned, balancing, as far as you're talking of Russia and China and things like that, how do you think this visit
I think now that Mr. Modi is back in India, we have to do homework here, saying that in as much as we have invested in the relationship with the United States, and many of them are long lead items. For instance, civilian nuclear commerce, major military platforms, high technology. We have to also be able to nurture our relationship with Moscow. And I think that is going to be a challenge for India's own political and the bureaucrats and the diplomats who deal with this, and also deal with China, because this is not binary, as my panelists have pointed out. For India, China and the United States, at one level it's a triangular, but concurrently it is being able to manage the contradictions in the bilaterals. That is going to be, the distillate of that will give you some sense about how India is going to deal with these contradictory compulsions. And to me, that seems to be the current challenge,
Manoj,
that China has to be looked after appropriately.
Manoj, how do you see it as far as these balancings are concerned?
See, first of all, we have to understand that we are in a world which is being transformed before our very eyes. We are seeing a major developments taking place in Syria. We are seeing this Saudi-Iran rift. In the east, we are seeing this the rise of China. So what we are witnessing is a very dynamic situation, and in this dynamic situation, we are an extremely poor country. For us, the challenge, our moment of opportunity, our period of opportunity is between now and 2040 or 2050. In these decades, we need stability, we need peace, we need a climate where people will invest here, there will be commerce and trade, and this country will become richer. Now, every step that we take must be towards that direction. So if we move with the US, we must move to create greater stability, greater, the observance of international law. Likewise, if we move with China or with Russia, it must be the same. And plus, what we really need to do is to keep that balance, meaning it's like a boxer, you're constantly shifting balance to a great deal. Your shifting depends on what your adversary is also doing.
Okay.
And the adversary here is not China as a country, but China as a system which is being ruled by a communist party, where we are seeing some very negative trends currently, which are not very helpful. Ultra-nationalism, a kind of aggressive tone that is emerging from there. And that is the reason why we need the US as a balancer as much as the US needs us. I think that point has been made.
Okay.
And in addition, of course, we have that other level of relationship with the United States, which has to do with the economic and trade part of it. That's a separate part which I will not go into, but only say that in the Modi visit, the bilateral investment treaty, the totalization treaty, and the IPR issues, none of them were addressed.
Exactly. Those were not addressed. We didn't have time to discuss that very quickly. The economic side doesn't seem to have gained the same kind of momentum which the strategic and the defense aspect has gained. Very quickly.
I think the reason is simple. We all notice the absence. The reason is that there is still a lot more work to be done before we can actually bring it to something.
Meera, very quick last words.
Yes, I would say, you see, at the realm of economic or trade policy, there are differences on a number of issues. But at the level of actual business, because trade and economic relations are about actual business flows, his meeting with the India-US Business Alliance saw pledges that about $45 billion worth of American investment is ready to flow to India over the next 3 years or so.
Okay.
So that is quite substantive, if it materializes.
Okay, if it materializes. That is the thing. We'll have to wait and watch. But, overall, as all my panelists say, that this has been a positive visit. This has, given some kind of a momentum to the relation, better momentum to the relations between India and US. We'll have to wait and watch, as Uday Bhakar says, how India will deal with other major parts. We'll wait and watch for that. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, Big Picture, same time tomorrow.